The feast ended an hour ago. You can still hear the last of the music fading down the hall, a lyre, a few voices, laughter thinning out into silence. Solomon stands alone in a room he built. The ceiling above him is cedar, shipped down from the mountains of Lebanon on rafts his own father never lived to see. The walls are lined with gold, hammered thin and pressed into the wood by men who worked for years on this room alone. Outside the window, gardens stretch further than a man can walk in a day, planted by his own order, watered by pools he designed himself. Somewhere in the stables below, there are horses. Somewhere in the treasury, there is more silver than the kingdom knows what to do with. He has everything. And he feels nothing. Not sadness, exactly. Not despair. Something quieter than that. Something closer to standing in a room after everyone has left it, the strange, hollow stillness that comes after you get the thing you spent years chasing, and it doesn't feel the way you thought it would. You know this feeling. Maybe not on Solomon's scale, maybe you've never built a palace or owned a treasury, but you know the shape of it. The morning after the goal is finally reached. The day after the wedding. The week after the promotion. That flat, disoriented quiet where you expected something to shift inside you, and instead, nothing shifted at all. Solomon is the richest man of his era. He is, by most historical accounts, the wisest man anyone in the ancient Near East has ever heard of. Foreign kings send envoys just to hear him talk. And in this moment, alone in a room built from his own success, he says one word to himself that will end up appearing 38 times in the book he's about to write. Hevel. Stay with me, because that word is the whole reason this book exists, and almost nobody translates it correctly. Here's what most people miss about Ecclesiastes. They open it expecting a suicide note. A bitter old man's complaint about how nothing matters. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, that's how the King James renders it, and in modern English, vanity sounds like arrogance. Like a man staring at his own reflection. That is not what the word means. Not even close. The Hebrew word is hevel, and it does not mean vanity. It means vapor. Breath. Smoke rising off a fire on a cold morning, visible for a second, gone before you can close your hand around it. There is an older use of this exact word earlier in Scripture, it's the name given to Adam's second son. Abel. Hevel. A life that was real, that mattered, that was there, and then wasn't. Cut short almost as soon as it began. That is what Solomon is telling you about everything he built. Not that it was fake. Not that it was worthless. That it was real, and that he could not hold on to it no matter how tightly he tried. This is not a story about a man who failed. This is not a story about a man who sinned his way into misery and got what he deserved. This is not a story about bad luck, or bad timing, or a curse. This is a story about the most successful human being in the ancient world discovering, with his own hands, that success has a ceiling, and that ceiling is lower than anyone tells you it is. And by the end of this video, you're going to hear the very last words this man ever put to paper. The final verdict of a life that had access to everything a person could want. It is not the ending you expect. But we have to walk through everything he tried first, because the answer only makes sense once you've felt the weight of everything that didn't work. Go back to the beginning of Solomon's reign, before any of this was built. He is young. He has just become king after his father David's death, and one night, God appears to him and asks a single question: what do you want? Ask for anything. Most men in that position ask for long life. Or wealth. Or the death of every enemy who ever threatened them. Solomon asks for wisdom. An understanding heart, he calls it, the ability to tell the difference between good and evil, so he can actually govern the people he's been handed. God is pleased with the request. So pleased that he gives Solomon wisdom beyond anyone before him, and wealth and honor on top of it, things he didn't even ask for. This should be the happy ending. It reads like one. But years later, writing as an old man, Solomon looks back on that gift and says something you don't expect. In much wisdom is much grief, he writes. The more knowledge, the more sorrow. Wisdom let him see everything clearly, every injustice under the sun, every good man who suffers and every fool who prospers, every pattern of human cruelty repeating itself generation after generation with nothing new under the sun to interrupt it. Wisdom didn't numb him to the world. It sharpened his vision of exactly how broken it is. Hevel, he calls it. Even wisdom. Even the very thing he asked God for. But it gets stranger. If wisdom couldn't satisfy him, Solomon decides to try the opposite. He turns to pleasure, and because he is the king of Israel with an unlimited treasury, pleasure doesn't mean a good meal and a quiet evening. It means testing every avenue of enjoyment available to a human being, at a scale almost nobody in history has ever had access to. He builds houses. He plants vineyards on hillsides chosen for the quality of the grape. He designs gardens and parks and fills them with every kind of fruit tree. He engineers pools of water just to irrigate a forest he planted from nothing. The historian Josephus, writing centuries later, describes Solomon's building projects and his wealth in terms that read almost like disbelief, a kingdom so resourced that even the animals in his stables were fed on grain shipped in from foreign lands. He imports cedar and craftsmen from King Hiram of Tyre, whole shipments of timber floated down the coast, just for the woodwork in his palace and his temple. He gathers silver until, according to the record, it was as common in Jerusalem as stones in the street. He collects singers, musicians, more wives and concubines than any king before him, every comfort a body could want, laid out in front of him like a table he never has to leave. And when it's all built, when there is nothing left to acquire that he hasn't already acquired, he does something almost nobody in his position ever does. He turns around and looks at it honestly. Whatever my eyes desired, he writes, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. And then I looked at everything my hands had built, everything I had worked to achieve, and behold. All of it was Hevel, a chasing after wind. There was no lasting profit in any of it under the sun. Here's the part nobody tells you about that verse. Solomon isn't saying the wine tasted bad, or the gardens weren't beautiful, or the music wasn't good. He's saying all of it was real, and none of it lasted long enough to satisfy the ache that sent him looking for it in the first place. You cannot chase wind and catch it. You cannot close your fist around vapor and carry it home. The Hebrew pairs the two words on purpose, Hevel, and ruach, the same word used for wind, and for spirit, and for breath. Whatever he was chasing, it moved every time he reached for it. And then there's the third test. The one that isn't private at all. Word gets out, the way it always does when a king becomes legendary, and eventually it reaches a queen far to the south, in Sheba, who has heard the reports and doesn't quite believe them. So she travels the distance herself, a caravan loaded with spices and gold and precious stones, to see if the stories about Solomon's wisdom are true. And when she arrives, she tests him. Hard questions, the kind meant to expose a fraud. And Solomon answers every one. By the time she leaves, she's the one who's stunned. She tells him plainly that the reports she'd heard didn't even come close to what she witnessed with her own eyes. Blessed are your people, she says. Blessed are the servants who get to stand in your presence every day. This is the part of the story where, by any outside measure, Solomon has won completely. Wealth. Wisdom. Reputation stretching to foreign kingdoms. A queen traveling hundreds of miles just to confirm the rumors are true. And Solomon writes his private verdict down anyway. Hevel. Here's the turn, though, and it's easy to miss. In the middle of listing everything that didn't satisfy him, Solomon says something almost like an answer slipping out early. There is nothing better for a person, he writes, than to eat and drink, and to find enjoyment in their work, and even this, he says, is a gift from the hand of God. Not the achievement. Not the applause. Not the treasury. Just, the meal in front of you. The work in your hands, today. A gift, not a prize you earned. Hold that thought, because it's going to matter a lot more by the end of this. So let's pause for a second, because it's worth naming the pattern before we keep going. Wisdom, Hevel. Pleasure and everything he built with his own hands, Hevel. Even the admiration of a queen who traveled hundreds of miles just to confirm he was everything people said he was, Hevel. If you've ever chased something for years, finally caught it, and felt that same flat quiet Solomon felt in that room, you're not broken, and you're not the first person to notice this. This entire book was written for you, 3,000 years ago, by a man with more reason than almost anyone in history to believe that the next achievement would finally be the one that satisfied him. If this is hitting something in you, stay with it. There's more of Solomon's search ahead, and where it ends up is not where you'd expect. Subscribe if you want to keep tracing this word through the rest of the book, and drop a comment if you've already felt your own version of Hevel. We'll get to what to do about it before this video ends. Because Solomon isn't finished testing things yet. And what he tries next is going to cost him something wisdom and pleasure never touched. Here's what wisdom and pleasure never touched, the things Solomon can't buy his way out of, can't build his way past, can't outthink. His own mortality. And worse, what happens to everything he built after he's gone. I hated all my labor, he writes, that I had labored under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who comes after me. And here's the sting in that sentence, who knows whether that man will be wise or a fool. Solomon has spent his entire reign accumulating wealth, expanding borders, building a temple and a palace that will outlast him by centuries, and none of it is really his. It's a loan. He gets to hold it for a while, and then it passes into someone else's hands, and he doesn't get a vote on whether those hands are careful. You don't need a palace to feel this one. You've built things too, a career, a family, a reputation, years of work poured into something you care about, and somewhere in the back of your mind is the same question Solomon is asking. What happens to this after I'm not here to protect it? History answers that question for Solomon, though he doesn't live to see it. He passes the kingdom to his son, and within a handful of years, that son's harsh rule splits the kingdom Solomon spent a lifetime building into two broken halves that never come back together. Solomon doesn't write about this directly, he's writing before it happens, but the fear in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 reads almost like he already sensed it coming. This is not a story about wealth being taken away. This is not a story about enemies tearing down what he built. This is not a story about a curse or a punishment. This is a story about a man realizing, in real time, that nothing he owns will stay in his control past the moment he lets go of it. Hevel, again. And this time paired with its twin, Ruach, chasing wind. Because that's exactly what building a legacy is, Solomon says. You spend your whole life running after something that keeps moving the instant you reach for it. You can build the wall, but you can't build the guarantee that it stands after you're gone. Now watch what happens next, though, because this is where the book stops sounding like despair and starts sounding like something closer to freedom. Solomon writes one of the most quoted passages in the entire Bible. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. On the surface, it reads like poetry. Underneath, it's an argument. Solomon has just spent 2 chapters proving that nothing he controls will last, and now he's pointing at something bigger than his control. There is a rhythm to life that was never his to command in the first place. The seasons don't ask his permission. Birth and death don't check with him first. And instead of that being one more thing to grieve, Solomon starts to lean into it. He has made everything beautiful in its time, he writes. Also, he has put eternity into the human heart, and yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. This is where it flips. Solomon isn't saying eternity is out of reach, so stop wanting it. He's saying the ache you feel, the reason nothing under the sun ever fully satisfies you, is because you were built with eternity wired into you, and you're trying to satisfy an eternal hunger with things that were only ever designed to last a season. That's not despair. That's a diagnosis. So here's where we finally get to it. The last test. The one Solomon doesn't run in a garden or a treasury, but in the quiet, after everything else has already failed to satisfy him. Think about the last time you finished something you'd worked toward for years. Not a small thing, a real one. A degree. A goal you'd circled on a calendar for a decade. A promotion you told yourself would finally be enough. You crossed the line. You got the title, the diploma, the keys, whatever it was. And you woke up the next morning waiting to feel different. And you didn't. That flat, disoriented stillness, the one where you expected the ground to shift under you and instead it just stayed the same, that is Hevel. Felt firsthand. Not from a Bible story. From your own life, this year, maybe this month. Solomon felt that same stillness, except he felt it after building an entire kingdom's worth of enough. And here's the part that should stop you. He had more access to more sources of meaning than any human being before or since, and he still couldn't manufacture satisfaction out of any of them. Not wisdom. Not pleasure. Not applause. Not legacy. If the richest, wisest man in the ancient world couldn't build his way to lasting peace, it was never going to work for the rest of us either. That's not a depressing thought. That's a mercy. It means you can stop auditioning things to see if they'll finally be enough. Solomon already ran the experiment at a scale you never will. So what's left? Remember the room from the beginning of this video, the cedar ceiling, the gold walls, the gardens outside the window, the man standing in the middle of everything he owned, feeling nothing? We promised you his final words. Here they are. At the very end of the book, an old man now, having tried everything a human life can offer, Solomon writes his last recorded instruction. Not a new palace. Not a new pleasure. Not one more attempt to outbuild the ache. He writes, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come. And then, in the closing lines of the entire book, fear God, and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. That's it. After everything, the wealth, the wisdom, the wine, the wives, the gardens, the queen who traveled hundreds of miles just to witness it, that is the verdict he leaves behind. Not build more. Not try harder. Not you just haven't found the right pleasure yet. Fear God. Keep His commandments. Let that be the center, instead of asking wisdom or pleasure or legacy to be the center for you. This is not a story about a man who gave up. This is not a story about a man who settled for less. This is not a story about resignation. This is a story about a man who tested every possible answer to the question what will finally be enough, and came back with the only answer that held its shape all the way to the end. Everything else was Hevel. Vapor. Real while you're holding it, gone the moment you close your hand around it. Only one thing wasn't. 3 things, before you go. First, the factual one. Hevel does not mean vanity. It means vapor, breath, something real that you cannot hold on to. Ecclesiastes is not a nihilistic book. It is one of the most honest books in the Bible, written by a man with the resources to test every claim about where meaning comes from, and the integrity to report back exactly what he found. Second, the personal one. Whatever you're chasing right now, the promotion, the relationship, the number in your bank account, the version of your life where you'll finally feel settled, it is going to do exactly what it did for Solomon. It will satisfy you for a season, and then it will move again, like wind, the moment you try to hold it still. That's not a flaw in you. That's just what created things do. They were never built to bear the weight of being your ultimate answer. Third, and this is the one that should stay with you longer than the rest. Solomon didn't end his search by telling you to want less. He ended it by telling you where to put what you already want. Fear God. Keep His commandments. Let the eternal thing hold the center, instead of asking a temporary thing to hold a place it was never built to hold. That's not resignation. That's relief. You can stop auditioning the next achievement to see if it's finally the one. It never was going to be. It was never supposed to be. So here's the question. Out of everything Solomon tried, wisdom, pleasure, building, legacy, applause, which one has been your Hevel? Which one have you been chasing, expecting it to finally be enough? Tell me in the comments. 3,000 years ago, a king stood alone in a room built from everything he owned, and felt nothing. And he wrote a whole book so that you wouldn't have to build the palace yourself just to learn what he learned the hard way. Vapor. Breath. Real while it lasts. Gone the moment you close your hand around it. Only one thing was never Hevel at all.